Welcome to a new episode of the Superpowered Fancast. This is Darren. One of the things that I've been consistently grateful for has been the opportunity to speak with people whose work I admire and whose creativity I have enjoyed for years. That's why I was so excited to reach out to someone who helped create some of my favorite works in animation over the last 2 decades. Greg Weisman is a writer, producer, and creator of the animated series Gargoyles, Young Justice, and The Spectacular Spider-Man, as well as writing for series like Star Wars Rebels and more. Beyond the animated series, Weisman continues the world of Gargoyles with multiple comic book series for Dynamite, as well as writing series like The Spectacular Spider-Man and more than that. Recently, Weisman penned Fantastic Four meets Gargoyles, which is currently available for Marvel, with a follow-up issue from Dynamite coming this month, and the upcoming Gargoyles meets Darkwing Duck coming soon. I am honored to have had the opportunity to speak with Greg Weisman about his work and more. So without further ado, here's my interview with Greg Weisman. Greg Weisman, thank you so much for being on the Fancast. I am a huge fan, and I guess just again, thank you for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, the first question I wanted to ask is because I've been following your career for a long time and just kind of read at beyond watching the shows that you've created and co-created. I've read a lot of the things that you've written. I'm a huge fan of the expansion of the world of Gargoyles, but I also kind of want to go back to like my first love was always comic books. It's kind of where I started in my journey. So my first question, especially to writers, I want to ask is kind of what was your journey as you are a comic book writer. What was kind of your journey to both comic books but also to writing for animation? Like, was there a specific comic that you loved growing up, or was it just was there something in the genre you that kind of connected with you that you said I would love to kind of write like this?
I mean, I started reading comics when I was a little kid. I always gravitated to superhero comics. When I was really young, you know, I didn't really understand that there were different companies, even, that if I saw Captain America team up with Spider-Man or Batman team up with Superman, I didn't get that next week I might not see Black Panther team up with Black Lightning, kind of thing. It didn't register to me uh, initially that there were these silos, these separate silos, and these characters belong to one company and these characters belong to another company. And it sounds a little dopey, but I was just a little kid. So, eventually you begin to go, oh, I see. These characters can't cross over. And then right about at that time was when Superman and Spider-Man had a big crossover. And I'm like, oh, wait, so they can cross over. But, it led to a couple crossovers and then it sort of ended for a while. Uh, I just always loved superheroes. And When I was in college, sophomore in college, Marvel announced this new talent search. And I was really interested in that. And again, I love Marvel characters and DC characters. But I also thought Marvel was just going to get swamped with submissions. And I figured if Marvel was announcing a new talent search, then DC would announce one as well. So instead of prepping stuff for Marvel, I prepped stuff for DC. And sure enough, a month later, DC announced their search, and I mailed my stuff off right away. And years later, when I was on staff there, I found the logbook where they logged all the submissions in a file cabinet that someone asked me to clean out. And and on that logbook, I was literally the second name on the logbook. And the first name, the address was Manhattan, was in Manhattan. So I thought, so the only person who beat me in was someone who I assume literally walked it over
Right.
and handed it in. And from a, U.S. Post Office standpoint, I was the first guy through the door. That surprisingly led to nothing, because my submission they lost pretty much instantaneously. They logged it in, and then what happened? Again, I was cleaning out this file cabinet. You know how hanging files work.
Yep.
If you happen to put something between two files as opposed to in a file, it just slides down to the bottom of the drawer. And if you have enough files, you can't see that it's there.
Right.
So they lost my submission, which again, those years later, I found at the bottom of that drawer. Um, and at the time, they got about 70% artist submissions and 30% writer submissions. And so they, instead of sort of contacting me and sort of copying to the fact that they had lost my stuff, they sent me a sort of standard form for how what I needed to do to be an artist for DC Comics. And I was outraged by this in the way that only a 19-year-old can be outraged. And so I typed up on my electric typewriter a scathing letter. Um, and again, it was on a typewriter, so I don't have a copy of it. I don't know. I can't, I mean, I kind of remember what I said, but basically it was like, I think this is very unprofessional. I'm a professional, which was a lie. I'd never sold anything in my life. And so, of course, I kept copies of my submissions, and that much was true. I had Xeroxed my submission before sending it in. And so if you couldn't find it, all you needed to do was contact me. I could have resubmitted it. And this was before email, so I put it in an envelope, put this letter in an envelope, put a stamp on it, put it in a mailbox. 2 seconds after I put it in the mailbox, I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I've sent this nasty letter to the head of DC Comics. I'm never going to work at DC ever. And then a few weeks later, I'm in my dorm room, and we had this thing that we called a phone, which to, I guess, a modern audience, they would call a landline. And we had one phone in our dorm room. And I had a roommate who was not into comics at all and didn't know anything about any of this. And he answered the phone and he said, some guy named Dick Giordano wants to talk to you. Dick Giordano at the time was, the late Dick Giordano was a great guy, the executive editor at DC Comics at the time. But I thought this was my friend Doug, my only comic book friend at college. I had one friend, and he didn't have a car, and I had a car. So once a week, I'd drive us over to the comic book store, and we'd buy comics, right? And I had told him what I had done, and I thought this was him, to rag on me. And so I get on the phone, and I'm like, so this is Dick Giordano. So first off, I've sent this nasty letter, and then I get on the phone with
Right.
all this attitude. And the voice at the other end, which is clearly not my friend Doug, is like, yes, this is Dick Giordano. And I immediately realize, oh my God, what have I done again? But he was great. And he said, I read your letter, and I thought you made some really good points. It was a good letter. And are you going to be in New York anytime soon? And I said, yeah, in fact, I'll be there in March. And he said, all right, well, and I'm going to put you on with my secretary. We're going to make an appointment. So he put me on with his assistant, Alice, who later became a friend. And and we made an appointment. Of course, I wasn't planning to go to New York. March was just my spring break. I didn't tell him
Right.
that. Though I think, given my address, he probably knew. And then I had to figure out how am I going to get to New York because I lived on the West Coast.
Right.
And so I was very fortunate. My dad had, airplane miles. He gave me some miles so I could fly out there because I had no money. Um, and I had a cousin who lived in Manhattan, and she let me crash on her couch. And the morning of the meeting, it's raining out, and my cousin says, "Okay, I got you a subway map. I'm going to show you how to get to where you need to go." And I said to her, I'm nervous about taking the subway. I'm afraid I'll miss the stop and or get lost.
Hmm.
So I think I'm just going to hail a cab. And I know it costs extra, but I'm just going to hail a cab. And she says to me, keep in mind I'm 19, right? She
Right.
says to me, she she's like only, I don't know, 3 years older than me. So she's 22, I guess, back then.
Yeah,
And
still a veteran in New York, I
right,
guess.
yeah, she'd lived there all of 7 months, I think,
Right.
8 months. And she said, "You're gonna hail a cab in Manhattan in the rain." And I'm like, "Yeah, I think that's probably the way for me to go." And she's like, she doesn't say, "Hey, you'll never be able to hail a cab in the rain. It can't happen. You really need to take the subway." She just says, "Good luck with that," and she leaves. And I'm thinking this is like a job interview, so you, your audience. I don't know if your audience is watching or just listening,
They're doing both.
but this is what I'm wearing now is sort of fancy for me, um, but I wore a suit and tie um, and I have an umbrella, and I step out of her apartment building, and immediately the wind destroys the umbrella. I mean, completely, flips it up backwards and breaks a number of the tines. It instantly becomes useless. I, that scene in Groundhog Day when Bill Murray steps off the curb and
Yeah.
into a pothole full of uh, ice water. I did that too. So within moments, I'm completely soaked, and then I try to hail a cab. And the only bit of good news is that I was so nervous that I left so early that even though I finally did get a cab, but it took me 45 minutes to get a cab, and I'm standing in the rain the whole time. And so by the time I arrived at DC Comics' offices, which back then were in New York at 666 Fifth Avenue, I always thought that was kind of a chilling address to have. I was looked like a drowned rat. I mean, I
Yeah.
just and and I was a kid, and Dick could have just said, "Okay, this guy's a dumbass," because I was. Um, but he took me seriously from day one, and he helped me get work, and I started writing comics for DC my sophomore year of college, and uh, eventually after I graduated, got a job there on staff, worked on staff for 2.5, 3 years, worked my way up from editorial assistant to assistant editor to associate editor, and began doing a little bit of writing. Particularly, Carrie Bates and I co-wrote a comic book called Captain Atom.
Captain Adam. Hmm.
And while we were doing that as partners, Carrie got a lead on writing for animation. And so we pitched a bunch of premises or springboards to Sunbow Studios, which was doing a number of animated series, including Transformers. We pitched to Transformers, didn't sell anything. We pitched to a show, I think called Wildfire, didn't sell anything. And we pitched to a show called Gem and the Holograms, and we sold one story. And so Carrie and I wrote this script for Gem and the Holograms. and it made it all the way through, and it aired, and that was my first television credit. And I thought, wow, this is the beginning of this whole career, and it led to nothing at all, nothing.
Right.
Um, I do think that later, a couple of years later, when I was back in Los Angeles, and I met with a guy at Disney TV Animation, the fact that I had written an episode, I don't know if it mattered, but it didn't hurt,
Right.
having that on my resume. Um, but yeah, I ended up taking a job at Disney TV Animation as a very, very junior executive there. And I thought this is my day job, and then I'll go home at night and I'll write. And
Mhm.
um, but I'd go home at night and be tired. And for 5 years, I wrote almost nothing of my own. I was writing in the job all the time, pitches and
Right.
even Bibles occasionally, and doing rewrites on stuff. But by the time I got home, I just wanted to zone out and watch TV. I continued to write Captain Adam for a couple of years, um, but ultimately I let that go. Ultimately, that ended, and uh, I didn't initially pick up any other comic book work. And finally, after 5 years, I sort of turned around and realized I had really not accomplished much of anything. But I had developed this show, Gargoyles. Um, I created it and developed it, and although it took a long time, finally sold it. Um, and um, and Gargoyles wound up. I wound up sort of becoming co-showrunner with Frank Parr and producer on that show. Um, and so I switched from being executive to quote unquote talent,
Right.
and um, and that's really where my life took me, which was being a showrunner, being a producer, being a writer, a story editor, occasionally a voice director, even occasionally a voice actor.
Right.
But I really delved into animation. I kind of left comics behind, but anytime I had the opportunity, I'd write comics. I'm from a comic book standpoint, I'm not exactly what you'd call an A-list writer, the
Mm.
kind of person that is sort of constantly getting offers. Hey, you want to do this? You want to do this? I would
Right.
get an offer like that every once in a while. Um, but I never built any momentum in the comics industry.
Yeah,
Um,
but you're kind of
but I've
still.
had fun.
Yeah,
I've had
yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
fun.
But you definitely mean still in it. And one of the questions I was going to ask you, especially when you mentioned gargoyles, was I don't know if you've answered it before. You probably have, but kind of what was the inspiration for gargoyles? Like it's just such it's always hit me as such a mature and interesting story. So I kind of always wondered like where did the idea come from? Because when Gargoyles aired, I think I was a teenager at the time, and I was kind of coming out of watching animation. But Gargoyles and Batman animated series kind of drew me back in. So kind of
Mhm.
what was like when you were sitting, were you just thinking about I want to these gargoyles that are stoned by day and I mean and live at night. Kind of where did that come from?
Well, at the most basic level, it came from stone statues. I mean, literally. I had been fascinated with gargoyles since at least high school. I went on one of those trips to Europe where you visit 8 countries in 5 weeks, so
Mhm.
not getting a lot of depth there, but
Yeah.
you're getting a lot of breadth, right? So, but I have photographs of me of standing next to a gargoyle on Notre Dame Cathedral. I have all these photos of gargoyles. I would collect postcards of gargoyles. I don't know why. It wasn't like I was sitting there going, I think in 15 years I'm going to create a television series about these. It wasn't like that at all. I just thought they were cool. And so years later, when I am at that point director of series development at Walt Disney Television Animation, my boss is like he wanted a show that had sort of little monsters, and the thing that he was looking at was Gremlins and the movie, I mean Gremlins, and going, well, I want something like that. And I said, well, what about Gargoyles? He's like, oh, I like that title. Yeah, do something with Gargoyles. So our first pitch um, was very much inspired by a show created by Jim Magon called Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears.
Yeah.
And so I thought Gummy Bears was a fantastic show with this rich medieval backstory and all these terrific ideas. And so, but it was the 90s. The Gummy Bears had been a show that was created in the late 80s, and this was now the 90s. And the buzzword in the 90s was edgy. Everything had to be edgy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Venom, Bane, Doomsday. Everything had to be edgy, right?
Yeah.
So how do we do Gummy Bears but make it edgier, right? So I said, okay, well, for starters, instead of doing cute little multicolored bears, we were going to do cute little multicolored monsters, gargoyles, right?
Right.
So that's edgier right out of the gate. And then instead of setting it in the Gummy Bear setting, which was sort of vague pastoral medieval times, we were going to have the story start there in medieval times, but then have them a spell cast, and they'd wake up 1,000 years later in modern day Manhattan, which was at the time, the edgiest city in the world, right? So back then, very edgy. And so we all sort of fell in love with that idea. The idea that they slept as stone during the day but woke up at night was very cool. And just the legends of gargoyles, that they protect the buildings they're on from evil spirits. And I was always sort of fascinated by the idea that you put a monster on your building to scare off other monsters. And so we put that show together. It was fun. I think it would have made a great comedy adventure show. And we pitched it to Michael Eisner, who at the time was the chairman of the Walt Disney Company, and at the time picked all the shows personal. Wasn't like approval by committee. It was the last of the Hollywood moguls up at the top, and he would decide what went and what didn't go. And he passed on it. He didn't like it. So we went back to the drawing board, so to speak, and my boss said, I still think there's something in Gargoyle, so work on it some more. So I showed the pitch to a handful of people, including a guy named Tad Stones, who had created Darkwing Duck, and I had worked with Tad, helped him develop Darkwing Duck. He was the creator, but I helped out. And I showed it to Tad, who was one of my mentors there, and he said he had seen an early cut before it was released of Beauty and the Beast. And so he said, well, you've got this human woman who's helping the gargoyles out. He said, instead of having all these little gargoyles, what if you had one big gargoyle and did a sort of Beauty and the Beast kind of thing? And I thought that really clicked for me. And I worked with an artist who I knew from my DC days called Greg Guler, who was doing props at Disney Animation at the time. And I knew Greg was capable of a lot more than just props. Not that props are unimportant, but I knew he could do a lot more than that. And so Greg and I created the character of Goliath. And then we took the whole comedy development, and I've said this many times, but put it through the prism of Goliath and came out the other end fundamentally with the show that you got to see on television, right? Yeah. And we put a pitch together, and we had all these ideas. I mean, this just opened the world up for us. So we had the mutates and the pack and all sorts of stuff. And we threw all this stuff into the pitch, and it was a long pitch, like 40 art cards long, because that's how we pitch things, one card at a time. And I had a sort of pre-written spiel that went with each art card that I had to make seem like it was off the cuff. But in fact, every line, every joke, everything was pre-scripted. And I pitched that to Eisner 6 months after I pitched him the first version. And he didn't like it. He passed. And so I thought it was dead. And the next day we had a meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was head of the Walt Disney Studios. So Eisner was head of the whole company,
Right.
and Jeffrey was head of the studio. And Jeffrey said at the end of the meeting, and you're going to keep working on Gargoyles, right? And I said, well, no. I mean, we pitched it as a comedy adventure. He passed. We pitched it as an action drama. He passed. He's just not interested in it. I don't know what else we do with it. And Jeffrey was like, oh no, he likes it. He just thought it needed work. Now I had the guy pitching the day before.
Right.
I know he didn't like it. I mean, but what that told me was that Jeffrey liked it.
Right.
And so I said, okay. And I took my team. We went back to the drawing board for the third time, and we looked at the show. And I looked at it really carefully, and I said, there's nothing wrong with this show. We're not changing the show. The problem was the pitch. We had thrown so many ideas into the pitch that it distracted from the key idea, which was this Beauty and the Beast thing.
Right.
So we took the pitch and we just cut things from it. Things that, again, we ended up doing in the show, the pack, the mutates, all that stuff we did in the show, because once you're making a show with 65 episodes, you need all this material.
Right.
But for the pitch, we just focused really tight on the relationship between Elisa and Goliath. And so 6 months later, again, because we only got to see Eisner every 6 months, we pitched this third pitch. And by that time, Beauty and the Beast had come out, and you may recall was something of a hit for the Walt Disney Company.
Yeah.
And we pitched the third pitch, and he bought it.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey turned to me and said, "You added a lot to that, didn't you?" And of course, we hadn't added anything. We just cut things.
Right.
But I said, yes, I did. And we got to make the show.
Yeah.
And then, there were other inspirations. I mean, certainly Hill Street Blues, which was a big inspiration for it. I think that the works of William Faulkner was an inspiration. The works of William Shakespeare was a huge inspiration. There were a lot of things that ended up contributing to making the show what it was and making the property what it is, including our recent comics. But I would say that the two biggest things are just gargoyle statues themselves and Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears, of all things.
Well, as the thing, I appreciate that. One, I appreciate two things. One, I like the fact that, like, even you had all the things that you wanted to introduce, which you ended up doing anyway, but it did kind of come down to keeping it simple as far as with the pitch. That's nice. Also, I'm glad you kind of validated something I always thought since I was a kid, because Beauty and the Beast is probably my favorite Disney animated feature. So, watching Gargoyles, I always kind of got that vibe with Goliath and Elisa, that it was a Beauty and the Beast thing. So I'm thankful that you kind of validated that for me. But and along those lines, again, being like a
I
teenager.
think when you see Elisa come out wearing Belle's ball dress on Halloween, that probably should have already validated you.
Yeah, I mean, it validated it beforehand, but that just kind of solidified it. I was just like, oh, okay, okay. But one of the things that you mentioned was, and I kind of, again, just for me, and I really appreciate it, because I was an English major in school, and I was in college, and a huge like reading nerd in high school. I was a Shakespeare fanatic. So when I saw an animated series that had so many Shakespearean elements, like Macbeth and the Weird Sisters and Titania and Oberon, it spoke to that part of me that was just heavily into Shakespeare. It's like and just kind of wondering how that, I mean, just as a short aside, like, was that something that you wanted to include, as far as
it evolved? I mean, I'm like you, a big Shakespeare fanboy. Not since high school. In high school, I didn't get it. I mean, I just didn't. But very early on in college, something clicked for me. And I just became obsessed with Shakespeare. Um, and at this period in my life, which was before I had kids, I was going everywhere to see Shakespeare. I would drive down. I live in Los Angeles. I would drive down to San Diego and see Shakespeare
Mhm.
at the Globe there. I would drive to Utah for the Utah Shakespearean Festival. I'd fly up to Oregon for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Um, any, I was all over the place with
Yeah.
Shakespeare. And but really, the origin of Shakespeare coming into Gargoyles was myself and Frank Parr, who was my fellow producer on the show, fellow showrunner, and Michael Reeves, who was our story editor and head writer for season one. Um, the three of us were at lunch and we're talking about creating a new villain for the show, something that wasn't part of the pitch initially. Um, and we really were talking about, frankly, someone along the lines of Batman, you know, no superpowers, but just mad skills
Mhm.
and enough money to create enough technology that between the technology and his skill set, he was giving the gargoyles a run for their money, despite their, being much stronger, being able to glide through the air, the wings, the tail, all that stuff. He was still giving them. And I said, it'd be great if he had some connection to them that was not just, hey, he's showing up like Craven the Hunter and hunting them for the hell of it. It'd be great if there was some backstory that connected him to it. And so Michael talked about, well, what if he was this Scottish king that somehow was immortal? And I thought, well, immortal Scottish kings, the most immortal Scottish king of all time was Macbeth because Shakespeare immortalized him, right? So I said, um, as villains go, Macbeth's a good one. So we decided to call him Macbeth. Then we decided, well, what if he just was Macbeth? What if it turned out Macbeth never died the way Shakespeare said? And so this really evolved organically. It wasn't me initially, later it was, but initially it wasn't me going, we got to get Shakespeare into this. This
Right.
just evolved in a conversation between me, Michael, and Frank into a character for the show. Then a couple people did some research for us because again, this is basically a pre-internet era. I know the internet had existed for years in a
Yeah.
theoretical sense,
Yeah.
but normal people weren't using it yet. And it's not like you could go online and research anything.
Right.
So, but I had a couple people. I had an assistant, Monique Beatty, who now runs production at DreamWorks Animation. And a friend, Tuppence McIntyre, who was back then an assistant district attorney for Los Angeles County, but who was Scottish, uh, had descended, her family was Scottish. And so she was just interested in Scottish genealogy. And so that
Right.
both of them did a bunch of research for us. And we began to read about the historical Macbeth as opposed to the Shakespearean Macbeth.
Mhm.
And the historical Macbeth was fascinating. And we began to bring in, we're like, well, we've got to tell these stories. These are amazing stories. And so we brought in the Weird Sisters. And then, we had this character Coldstone, who was sort of an Othello figure for
Right.
us. And so we created a Desdemona and Iago figure.
Right.
And then we brought in Puck, and then we brought in Titania and Oberon and various other characters from Shakespeare. And since in the comics I've introduced even more.
Right.
Um, and I think at some point this played into my own passion for Shakespeare, but I also think that at some point Michael Reeves and the other writers began to realize, oh, if we put Shakespeare in, Greg will tend to approve it. They were just pandering to me.
Yeah.
And I was aware that they were doing that. And I was like, but it's working. It's good. Keep doing it. So, and it just seemed to work for our show really well. It just, again, it began very organically. It wasn't always quite as organic, but it always seemed to fit organically. into what we were doing. So we just kept doing it. And I continue to do it to this day.
Well, as an audience member, I can tell you it never felt forced. It never felt like something that was just kind of thrown in there. It always felt like it was a part of the story that needed to be there. But
Yeah.
but also
I
going
mean,
in the story. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
the thing about Gargoyles, honestly, is that when it's really working, I don't even feel like I'm coming up with these stories. I almost feel like I'm tapping in. Like if there's a multiverse somewhere out there, there's an actual Gargoyles universe, and all I'm doing is tapping into it and telling these stories because things just work out. When we were doing the episode The Mirror, which introduced Puck, I'm in my office and suddenly it occurs to me, here's a spoiler from 30 years ago, that Owen is Puck.
Right.
I'm just like, oh my God, of course, Owen is Puck. And so I called Bryn Chandler Reeves and Lydia Morano, who were the writers on The Mirror, and I said, listen, Owen is Puck. And they're like, we know, because it was just so right that separately the two of them had come up with the exact same thing. And that was how Gargoyles went. Things just seemed to fall into place. We'd start doing the history of Macbeth, and then that led us to other Scottish kings and other histories. And all of that seemed to fit so organically that it's almost like, hey, we're not even coming up with this stuff. We're just executing it, and that's what it's been like. It's been, it's always a joy to work on Gargoyles. I'm not saying it's never hard, but it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And having Puck voiced by Brent Spiner was a brilliant decision. But you mentioned the multiverse, and that definitely transitions into the next thing I want to talk about. I read and I reviewed a couple of weeks ago a crossover between Gargoyles and the Fantastic Four, and I thought it was such a great concept that I would love to know, like, kind of how that came into your head. Like, if I mean, with all of the heroes of the Marvel universe living in New York, why kind of have the Gargoyles crossover with Fantastic Four, and even to a lesser extent Iron Man, because I love the Tony Stark Xanatos moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fun.
Kind of where did that come about?
Well, really, it didn't come from me. I mean, I wrote them. But we'd been told, we're doing these Gargoyles comics for Dynamite, and we've been told over and over again, no, we can't do any crossovers. We're not even allowed to cross over with other Disney properties. Like, um, I and then suddenly I got a call from my editor, Nathan Cosby, saying, hey, they want to do a Gargoyles Marvel crossover. Who do you want to do it with? And at the time, I was also writing a book for Marvel called The Spectacular Spider-Man, which
Yeah.
featured both Peter and Miles. And I thought, let's do a Spider-Man Gargoyles crossover.
Mhm.
And so Nate takes that over to the powers that be, and they come back and say, no, you can't do Spider-Man. Okay. Well, thematically, X-Men is a good matchup with the Gargoyles. There's a team of X-Men. The whole mutant thing is a metaphor for racism, which is a big thing that we do in Gargoyles as well. So I thought that would be it. And they said, no, can't do X-Men. At which point I said, okay, look, I love all the Marvel characters, but I'm tired of guessing. Why don't you tell me who you want to do this crossover with? And they came back and said Fantastic Four. Now, for them, I'm guessing that's because of the movie. I mean, I don't know that, but no one ever sort of said, here's why you can't do these and you can do these. I don't know why I couldn't do the others, and I don't know why they wanted me to do Fantastic Four. I can only guess. And my guess is they had a big movie coming out.
Yeah.
Fantastic Four is going to be big. I also think I had done in Spider-Man, I'd had Ben and Johnny guest star a couple times in
Right.
there, and I guess I handled them well enough because Tom Brevoort at one point called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to do just a 11 page or 10 or 11 page Fantastic Four story for Fantastic Four fanfare?" I said yes, and I did that. And I guess they thought, okay, this guy knows how to write the FF. So
Right.
that may have been part of it too. The big push on the FF with the movie and the fact that they'd seen me write these characters before and thought I got them.
Right.
But whatever their reasoning is, I never was told. It was just like FF. And I'm like, okay, actually, that's great because there are a lot of things that these have in common. And in fact, if you go back again to the Eisner era when we were making the show and we were starting to do season 2, I was in a big meeting with Michael Eisner and a whole lot of executives where Eisner said, I want to buy Marvel Comics. At the time, Marvel was in bankruptcy and he could have gotten it for next to nothing. And I was very excited. And I watched in that meeting as all these other executives talked him out of it. Said, no, you don't want Marvel. It's a disaster. It's a mess. You want Marvel because you want to make a Spider-Man movie. But Marvel has triple sold the rights to Spider-Man to all these different companies. You want to make a Fantastic Four movie, but Fantastic Four is locked up with canon and it's a mess. You don't want it. So they talked him out of it. Of course, decades later,
Right.
Bob Iger buys Marvel, but he's got to pay a fortune for it. I mean, the GDP of a small nation in order to
Yeah.
get it. Whereas Eisner could have gotten it
Could have
for
gotten it for a song, right?
right,
Basically.
exactly. Um, but in that meeting, after those guys talked him out of buying Marvel, he goes, "Okay, but see, Warner Brothers, they've got Superman, they've got Batman. We don't have anything at Disney. We've got all these great characters, but we don't have anything at Disney in that market, in that sort of action hero market." And he turns to me and he says, "Could Gargoyles be the start of that?" And I said, "Yeah."
Yeah.
And so we decided to view Gargoyles as the first family, that is the Manhattan clan of Gargoyles, as the first family of the Gargoyles universe. And
Mhm.
in season 2, you see a bunch of episodes that are really backdoor pilots for things like Pendragon, King Arthur,
Mhm.
uh,
All
for
the Avalon stuff. Yeah.
New Olympians. There were a whole bunch of them. And we came up with all these series ideas. Bad Guys was sort of a dirty dozen kind of thing. We had a prequel called Gargoyles Dark Ages. And I've since done comics of
Yeah.
Bad Guys and Dark Ages. We had a sequel set far in the future called, at the time, it was called Future Tense, Gargoyles Future Tense, but eventually it became Gargoyles 2198. And we had a spin-off for Brooklyn called Time Dancer, where he was bopping around through time. And we had all these ideas.
Right.
Then, none of that ever happened really, because all these people did. Eisner and Katzenberg went to war with each other. Katzenberg left. He founded DreamWorks. My immediate bosses, Gary Kreisel and Bruce Cranston, all went to DreamWorks. The people who took over for them um, sort of didn't have the attachment to Gargoyles, and so it all sort of went away. But that idea of the Manhattan Clan being the first family of the Gargoyles universe, 30 years later, when they're talking to me about Fantastic Four, I'm like, well, that's kind of perfect because you've got a family over at the Baxter Building, which is in Midtown Manhattan.
Right.
You've got my family of Gargoyles on the Erie Building, which is on Central Park South, right?
Mhm.
So I'm like, you can see one skyscraper from the other, right?
Mhm.
And they're two series that are very family centric.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is actually perfect. In some ways, it's better than Spider-Man or X-Men.
Hmm.
Um, and so we did a little 4-page preview story at the back of Demona Zero, which was released on Free Comic Book Day last May. Is that
Hmm.
May?
Yeah.
Um, and just a tease, and then we just picking up where that little tease left off. 2 weeks ago, I think, we released Marvel released Fantastic Four meets the Gargoyles, and in November, Dynamite releases Gargoyles meets the Fantastic
Fantastic
Four,
Four. Yeah.
and those three stories, the Free Comic Book Day preview, and then the Marvel one and the Dynamite one, those three are all in continuity with each other. None of them are in continuity with either the Marvel universe or the
Right.
Gargoyles universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to assume in the multiverse there's yet another universe where all these characters can interact.
Yep.
And when I was working with Michelle, my editor at Marvel, I'm like, going, hey, I want to use the Marvel's Gargoyle character, who was a hero in the Defenders for years, that Mark DeMatteis co-created, that I was always a big fan of. And we decided to use the gray gargoyle, and because again,
Yeah, I
how
thought
could
that
we
was
not?
funny.
And I said, hey, I'd love to put, I know this is a Fantastic Four story, but I'd love to sort of put Tony Stark and Xanatos in a room together. And she's like, yeah, do it. And so we had Diablo, and it
Mhm.
got a little out of control maybe, but it's a
Yeah,
lot of fun, I
yeah, but
think.
it's a lot of controlled chaos, which I enjoy
Yeah.
because it's
And
just like
so,
all of it made sense.
yeah, it all just sort of fit together. We wound up doing this sort of little prologue at the beginning set um, in Valencia, Spain in the Middle Ages, which actually tied in nicely with our Demona comic that Frank
Yeah,
Barr and I are doing. Um, and it all seemed to just fit because Diablo, who's our main villain, was his origins were in Spain and
yeah,
in the Middle Ages, and that fit with what we were doing in our book, Demona traveling the world with her adopted daughter Angelica. Um, so I'm like, all right, like I said, that's the thing with Gargoyles. Sometimes it just seems to work, and in fact, most of the time it just seems to work. And so that's what we did. We had a lot of fun, and and then again next month, Gargoyles Fantastic Four comes out from Dynamite, and that more or less picks up where I mean, all of these stories are standalone, but they sort of pick up on what we've done in the previous story. And um, so I think that one's going to be a lot of fun too.
and then along those lines, and you're talking about not being able to use other Disney characters, but you have another crossover coming up with Darkwing Duck. Like kind of what was the what was the origin of telling that kind of story? Because
Right.
you're kind of
So,
going from kind of serious to like really silly. Like,
yeah. And I was writing those like alternating issue, so it was really like from the sublime to the ridiculous all the
right,
time. But the origin of that, again, early on, I talked to Nate and Dynamite about, hey, we should just see if we can do a crossover here, a crossover there, or whatever. And the word just kept coming back from Disney, no crossovers. You're just doing Gargoyles, no crossovers. You can't. So I had stopped asking about that kind of thing. And
right,
then this Fantastic Four thing came up. And again, I have no idea from a business standpoint why they changed their minds.
mhm,
I'm not privy to those. It's above my pay grade, I guess you'd say.
right,
But they suddenly they're Nate's coming to me and he's going, "Hey, how about a Gargoyles Darkwing Duck crossover?" I'm like, "I'd love to, but I'd want to work with Tad Stones,
right.
who created Darkwing." And so he contacted Tad, and Tad said, "I'd love to, but I want to do it with Greg Weisman." So that worked out nicely. And again, I helped Tad develop Darkwing Duck before Gargoyles, and Tad had this major sort of moment on Gargoyles where he really helped me out by sort of pushing me to create the character that became Goliath. So that was really great. So we co-plotted this 4-issue miniseries crossover in yet another universe where Gargoyles and Darkwing both exist, I guess. And we'll call that the Disney Afternooniverse.
Right.
And we had a great time, and we've got a great artist Ciro doing the book, and it's looking great. I think the first issue comes out in January, I think. But even then, I just as a cameo, I wanted to throw in the Bully Boys from DuckTales,
Right.
and Disney was like, no, it's Darkwing characters and Gargoyles characters. You can't have any DuckTales characters. And I'm
Because like,
like,
what about Launchpad?
I said that when they're like, well, but Launchpad is an official Darkwing character. He's officially allowed to be in both, but you can't do the Bully Boys. They're not Darkwing characters, and not Bully Boys.
The
Beagle
Beagle.
Boys.
Yeah.
Beagle Boys. And I'm like, okay, I guess, all right. But I don't understand it. I sort of, again, it's above my pay grade, but I'm like, who are you worried about suing you? Are you afraid Disney's going to sue you, Disney? I don't understand.
Right.
And I still don't understand. And again, they don't feel the need to explain it to me. But I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. We're getting to do Darkwing and Gargoyles, and it is a lot of wacky, wacky fun.
Good.
It's the tone is definitely more on the Darkwing side than the Gargoyles side. But what's great about Gargoyles is that it's a flexible enough property
Right.
that we can play the humor of these characters without undercutting who they are.
Yeah.
And so Goliath is in character, Brooklyn is in character, Elise is in character. They're just reacting to this slightly more goofier stuff that's not slightly, massively more goofy stuff that
See,
we're
now, in my opinion, you're going to have to, at some point, go full circle and have the gargoyles meet the gummy bears. That,
I would absolutely love to do that. But again, it's these things aren't my
yeah,
call. It's just sort of,
I was meant as a fan that just from everything you told me about the
no,
origin of it, you just
I would get a huge kick out of doing that.
but
Absolutely.
yeah, and then going along those lines, just to kind of like wrap things up, because I love the comics, and I love the direction you've been taking Demona, just because she's such an interesting character. Um, like she's so multifaceted beyond just a revenge story, which is what I always kind of thought that she was in the beginning. So, what do you think makes her such an enduring character, such an interesting character to write?
I think that Demona has so many facets. She is fascinating to write. She's fascinating to read. She's fascinating to watch because she's not wrong about a lot of things,
Yeah.
though she's almost always wrong about what she does about it. Demona is, without a doubt, her own worst enemy. Um, she's driven by things that I've tried to explore in the Demona series in Dark Ages, insecurities and vulnerabilities that she doesn't want to admit to. She's incredibly smart, and yet can so allow her temper to overwhelm her, or her need for revenge, or whatever, that it leads her down unproductive paths. But she's passionate and she cares.
Right.
And so it's easy, even in this character who, let's admit it, is frankly genocidal.
Yeah.
Um, it's easy to be sympathetic towards her.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fiction. I don't think in the real world we'd have a lot of sympathy for Demona, but
No.
if she
Not at
really
all.
existed. But in a fictional thing, it's easy to sort of not root for her and yet root for her to change or root for her to grow and root for her to learn. And she comes close often,
Right.
but there's always this thing that pulls her back, and it's a kind of fear of vulnerability, I think. And
Because I noticed with her, she's not without emotion. So it's not
oh
like she
no,
can't feel. It's just
and
she,
it's not like she's incapable of doing something decent here and
right.
there. She does that periodically all the time. She makes these choices, and then sort of is kicking herself over. Wait, I wasn't supposed to do the decent thing. God damn
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Can I take it back? And but I think there's a big part of her that she doesn't want to acknowledge, that wants to try and do the decent thing,
Right.
and again, so we see her do that periodically, and then she turns away from that. And so I think again she just becomes incredibly interesting and a lot of fun to write. It's been great working with Frank again. Frank and I were both the original showrunners on TV show, and Frank actually came to me and pitched doing a Demona series set during that 1,000 years when she was awake and all the other
You're right.
gargoyles
Yeah.
of the clan were asleep or dead. And we pitched that to Nate, who pitched it to Dynamite and Disney. And we're doing this 5-issue series. The first 3 issues are out. Issue 4 comes out shortly. And Frank has just been doing some stunning work with colors by Robbie Bavard, which just take Frank's stuff and really enhance the hell out of them. And again, we've been able to tell 5 sort of, I think, very cool stories of Damona's time, and it's been just fantastic. And I'm issue 4 is done.
Yeah.
Issue 5, I wrote a long time ago, and I've been seeing the last few pages are coming in from Frank now, and it's amazing stuff. And Robbie is coloring the earlier pages from issue 5, as Frank is finishing up the last pages, and it's looking just terrific. And I think it's this heartbreaking
Yeah.
final story.
Was there anything that you're currently working on, like beyond the things we've talked about, that you would kind of like to tease, like some things that are coming in the future for you?
I mean, we've got a Gargoyles Winter Special that Nate Cosby and I co-plotted, and Nate is scripting, which will be drawn by George Cambadeas, who's been our one of our main Gargoyle artists from day one at Dynamite. And that'll be a lot of fun, featuring Broadway investigating one of Elise's cold cases with the help from Bronx.
Yeah.
Uh, and and then that's followed by the Darkwing. So that comes out in December. Then Darkwing 4 issues coming out, I think January, February, March, and April, and then that'll be followed by the next big Gargoyles run, which I'm working on right now. Otherwise, working on a few freelance things that is too early to talk about, but hoping to have more to show down the road.
Do you ever think, and this will probably uh, be my second to last question. Do you think that there could be a possibility of the animated series coming back in some other form, just as like
I do think
a
it's
feature film?
possible. Um, I think it's possible to come back as an animated series. I mean, I think the success of X-Men 97 sort of demonstrates in a streaming universe. I think we could do Gargoyles 98 or Gargoyles 99 and pick up right where
Yes.
the TV show and the comics have left off. the you know the you can have access to the first 65 episodes like that. You
Right.
turn on Disney Plus and they're there. So, we'd write the first few episodes so that if you've literally never seen Gargoyles before, it'll get you up to speed. But, if it makes you curious and if we're doing our jobs right, it will. You can go back and watch those 65 episodes because they're there. You don't have to hunt for them. They're on the same streaming service where this new show would be.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's rewarding.
Yeah.
So I do think it's possible. Right now, and this has been announced, so I can say it, Atomic Monster uh, is developing a live action Gargoyles series for Disney Plus. Now, development doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen, but
Right.
I know they're working on it. And so that could happen. And we've had a little bit of talks about bringing back the animated series. Again, I don't want to make it sound like it's been greenlit or that
Yeah.
I'm being cagey. I'm not being cagey. We've had some
No, no.
talks.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all it is. But I do think it's a possibility. And I hope it is. I hope it happens. But nothing really to report now. But at least there's been some conversation, and it's a start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally am manifesting that for you guys. I would love
Thank you.
to see that happen. But Greg Weisman, if you wanted anyone to follow you on social media, where could they find you?
I'm on X with some reluctance.
Yeah, it seems to be
Uh,
a through line anytime I ask that question.
so at Greg, Greg underscore Weisman, Weisman. I also have a website, askgregweisman.com, ask Greg Weisman, all one word.com, where people have been asking me questions and I've been answering them for about 25 years. So the good news is that all those questions are archived. You can and they're archived by subject matter, so you can go through and there are thousands of questions about Gargoyles, Young Justice, Witch, The Spectacular Spider-Man, anything I've ever worked on, and a few things that I didn't work on are all there. And there's a search function, or you can and so the odds are any question you have has probably been asked already, and it's there. The slightly less good news is that I'm still answering questions, but there have been so many questions that right now, I think today I answered a question that was posted in 2022. So I'm about 3 years behind. I get more, I can't answer questions as quickly as the entire world can ask questions.
Right.
So if you posted a question now, it would probably take me 3 or 4 years to get to it. But my point is that the archive, the odds are that question was asked already, and you could probably search the archive and find that answer immediately. And if not, then yeah, you post it. In a few years, I'll get to it eventually.
Well, I absolutely appreciate you taking the time to answer mine today.
Happy to do it.
But Greg Weisman, thank you again so much. I would love to have you back another time.
No, you know how
Uh,
to find me now, so anytime you want.
all right, I will definitely take you up on it and fanboy out some more about everything that you've done that I enjoy. So thank you
Thanks.
so much. Once again, I want to thank Greg Weisman for being on the podcast. The first Gargoyles Meets Fantastic Four from Marvel is currently available. The follow-up issue from Dynamite comes this November. At the time of this episode, the new issue of Gargoyles Demona comes out this week, and Gargoyles Darkwing Duck comes out in January. Now, you can find Greg Weisman on X at Greg_Weisman or on his website, AskGregWeisman.com. You can find the Superpowered Fancast on our Facebook page. You can find us on X at Superpowered Fan, on Instagram, on Blue Sky, and on TikTok at Superpowered Fancast. Once again, for the Superpowered Fancast, this is Darren, thanking you for watching and signing off.